The next station will be Fortuna 69.
I would say the most common criticism my channel gets from others is that I complain too much about the game. In a way, I can understand why people say that about me. Much like how I'm very fond of spewing my opinions out constantly, other people can obviously do the same. It's very common for people to have opposing opinions, so while I personally disagree with the notion that all I do is complain, that doesn't mean it's fine to demonize or ignore those who say or think differently from you. With that in mind, today's video will be a bit different. This time around, I'll touch upon something I legitimately enjoy: endless missions. To be specific, disruption is my absolute favorite mission type in the game, even though some people aren't exactly fans of it. Endless missions in general don't exactly get a good reputation sometimes because enemies scale super hard as the game progresses, but the loot doesn't always do the same. On top of that, the monotony of doing the same thing over and over and over is boring, even by Warframe grinding standards, which is why people don't usually do endless missions for over an hour, unless they're trying to go for some record or are just on a massive farming spree. Additionally, in order to maximize how far you can really go into an endless mission, you're kind of silently forced into taking warframes that are capable of reaching higher levels without a problem, which is why resilient warframes like Chroma, Nidus, and Inros are so popular for survival runs, especially among solo players. Although I've addressed before that reworking armor is a bigger concern than reworking damage, that isn't really the topic of this here. Instead, the question for today is, how exactly do you entice players to actually do endless missions and such, without making them feel like blowing their brains out in the process? Short answer? Make the missions fun and rewarding. Long answer? Well, first you would have to ensure that rewards actually scale as the game mode goes on. If enemies are going to scale to ridiculous levels, it's only fair that rewards and loot you get further into the mission scale upwards as well. For instance, once the player breaches the level 80 mark, the chance and the amount of rare loot dropped from enemies should be doubled. Once the player passes the level 100 mark, every Eximus enemy killed should drop something new, such as a guaranteed endo drop, but randomized anywhere from 10 to 100. Eventually, if the player gets past the level 120 mark, then the loot that the player gets every 5 minutes should either be increased in amount, meaning that instead of getting one relic every 5 minutes you would get 2 or 3, or be increased in value, meaning that instead of getting a regular relic, you could get an exceptional or radiant relic. The entire point of an endless mission is for the player to hold out as long as possible for the greatest amount of loot possible. So if you allow the risk and enemies to scale up but refuse to do the same for the rewards, then you're effectively killing off any reason for players to want to come back to doing endless missions. Secondly, endless missions should have something that makes them fun to go into, whether it's the loot you get or some other unique aspect of that mission type. In the case of disruption, the reason why it's fun to play for some, including myself, is because it breaks up the boredom of endless missions by introducing a random buff or debuff with every objective you defend, meaning that it's harder if not impossible to just mindlessly slog through the mission. Sure, you might be able to get away with doing so at lower levels, but once you actually start consistently being brought down to low health, having to potentially deal with an Eximus wave or enemy damage resistance as a sudden debuff would make things more of a challenge instead of being something that can simply ignored. Part of the reason why I honestly love playing Disruption is because it offers a semblance of actual difficulty in Warframe. Instead of throwing enemies at you that are completely immune to abilities or deal asinine amounts of damage, all it does is occasionally throw in a random element that either helps or hurts you as the game progresses, which under normal circumstances would sound like just a gimmick, but in practice it isn't, primarily because disruption missions are different enough from other endless missions such as survival or infested salvage to make it fun. Instead of simply being thrown against a literal endless horde of enemies, all you have to do is prevent one enemy from reaching one objective. On paper, that's pretty simple. But when you factor in other regular and Eximus enemies that you also have to deal with as the game goes on, in addition to the occasional random buff or debuff that kicks in, things get slightly more chaotic, and that's part of the fun, if you ask me. It's perfectly fine to have something repetitive in Warframe, but if you offer up nothing interesting, nothing fun, or nothing rewarding, nobody's going to care. Endless missions do have the capability to be more enjoyable than they are currently, which I would say is necessary because Warframe is synonymous with grinding, and a considerable chunk of that grinding is done in endless mission settings. If you want to make the players farm for something, that's totally okay, but there's no reason that players shouldn't be able to have fun along the way. I'm pretty sure some of you out there remember the old days of endless missions where you could potentially get trash like this. If you were one of those wacko individuals that liked that,
Stop it. Get some help.
thank you for watching.